And we had case studies in Bolivia, India, UK, Lebanon, Spain, and Turkey. So that's basically, you see the group here. But I would like to start my presentation with the tale of two moments. First, we go back to 1989, late 1989, early 1990. The photos you see in black and white on the screen on the left-hand side. So basically, when the local citizens in the coastal town of Foça in Western Turkey heard that there has been some legal and political process to build a coal-fired power plant, which used to be an idyllic seaside town that was particularly famous with its fishing and also with its seals. The community started organizing and partnering up with the Chamber of Mechanical Engineers, later what turned into be Turkish Green Party also. Basically, the local citizens discovered that what was on the cards was a massive coal-fired power plant in the region, which would be built by a new economic model that was brought by the neoliberal reforms of Turgut Özal government in the day. That was right around the time when Turkey was kind of slowly recovering from the military dictatorship after the coup d'etat in 1980. And there was a complete opening up of the economy towards neoliberal reforms to attract foreign direct investment. And basically, the state institutions hold the opinion that basically a coal-fired power plant in the region, which would be built by at least 70% foreign capital, will not cause any environmental damage. And basically, this created a massive movement of people, leading to a human chain of 50,000 people, experiments in local democracy of elections and kind of voting against this coal-fired power plant and so on and so forth. And basically, these people managed to stop the coal-fired power plant back in the day with a multi-dimensional struggle. And we flash forward to May 2016, the photos that you see on the right-hand side. And this second moment was during the second coming of the anti-coal movement in the region, when around 5,000 people this time descended upon Alia Foça region to protest not only the now functioning coal-fired power plant, but also plans to build furthermore coal capacity in the region, together with a massive mountain of coal ash dump. Actually, the reason and the underlying conditions that led to this revitalization of the coal-fired anti-coal movement in the region could be traced back to the Gezi protests in 2013, which kind of revitalized the grassroots neighborhood organizations and basically helped them to kind of come out of a long-term hiding. These are traditionally environmental groups that are loosely organized, informal, and basically they are usually ad hoc groups based on local movements. So just to also contextualize geographically where we are. So this is Turkey. Basically, we are on the western coast, and these 2 points, the one on the top is Ali Ağabey, where most of the energy investments are made, and the circle to the bottom is the site where the protest happened in 2016, which now hosts a massive mountain of coal ash. And this is basically on a backdrop of an idyllic coastal town that is supposedly a key tourism area. And to put things into perspective, I think it's useful to think about what has been brewing in Turkey over the past 2 decades, as that since the Erdogan government took over in 2002, actually neoliberal reforms that were planned before them got a further impetus, but this time only to be complemented with further deterioration of rule of law and basically using the heavy hand of the state to impose particular energy and infrastructure projects. coal has been and still is on the front line of these changes. So basically, what you can see is that the share of coal in Turkey's energy mix is roughly around 40%, but Turkey is the second country after China in terms of the coal fired energy pipeline. So Turkey is planning to build almost double amount of the installed capacity it has as of today. So basically, there is a massive coal rush, which at times slow down, at times accelerate. But this kind of movement in Alia Foça region is basically happening in this political economic context. And the region is particularly problematic because it doesn't only host energy sites, but it also hosts shipbreaking, iron and steel smelting, and so on and so forth. Basically, this is a long-term engagement we had with the region. So first, writing the historical, the histories, the micro-histories of the movement with my colleagues, which appeared as a book chapter in this book that you see here. But then we wanted to take a step back. So we looked at the past, we looked at the present. So what we wanted to do was to look at the future of this movement and understand what kind of visions and aspirations the movement was looking forward. So in that regard, our key research questions here were that how do environmental movements imagine transformative futures under authoritarian populism, under authoritarian regimes, and what tools do they mobilize to reach them, and how they consider themselves as being instrumental, useful, or not useful in terms of reaching particular societal visions, and what limits them to reach these. And theoretically, we actually picked particularly green utopianism and transformations research as our conceptual backdrop, and also using scenario methodologies, particularly backcasting, as a participatory research method to break the activist academic boundaries in environmental justice research. So here we make a distinction. We don't really talk about energy transitions or transitions to renewable energy, but we talk about transformations in the most radical meaning of the word, particularly with a focus on power relations from the local to the national and global, but also looking at the political economy in the region. So basically, in this regard, our focus is on the transformations in terms of understanding what are the mechanics, logics, tools, agents, and dimensions of this change, potential change, and how do environmental movements understand this. One issue that has been, and it still is relatively lacking in the literature on transformations, is the role of resistance and how the resistance of particularly grassroots groups could potentially lead to radical transformations in the regions. And our argument here was that basically conflicts, environmental conflicts, offer possibilities for confrontation and change. And in that regard, they actually open up a space to think multiple energy futures in specific locations. These conflicts are natural and inevitable, so we don't really see a reason to focus on conflict mitigation or conflict transformation as such, but actually using these conflicts as a springboard towards jumping to alternative futures. And within the resistance, basically, what we are particularly interested in is to looking at how multiple futures are creating. This is beyond the redistribution. This is about both the legal structures, but extra legal structures. And as, again, to understand how power relations particularly play a role in this, we use the framework of our colleagues from the project, Joaquim Rodriguez and Mirna Inturias, who basically created a framework on understanding the hegemonic power. And they basically divide the hegemonic power into three components. One of them is a structural power, the other one is a power of agency, and the third one is a decentered power. One looking more on institutions, legal structures, the other one looking into people, relations, alliances, and the last one, decentered power, particularly looking at narratives, discourses, and worldviews towards the future. And we basically followed this structure in creating 3 different scenarios for the region, and we have conducted 2 scenario workshops and one focus group study, together with multiple visits to the site and lots of interviews with the members of Yenifoça Forum. What we did was we basically built these 3 scenarios together with the community based on these parameters, looking at demographic, economic, social, cultural changes in the region. So this was more of a desktop work, so to say, in terms of building these parameters. And we ended up creating these 3 scenarios, A, B, and C. We named them differently, you will see now, along these 2 axes. So on the one axis, it was from the local to global in terms of looking how the local grassroots community creates particular visions for its livelihood, but also beyond that towards, say, the global climate justice. And how do they understand the integration with the rest of the world, and how do they actually imagine different futures? And then also we looked at different governance structures, from a very localized governance to a more centralized, so a more decentralized governance to complete decentralization, which is what's happening in Turkey basically now. So our results, this is only partially analyzed, I'm afraid, but what we came up with, the community group, are these 3 alternative future scenarios. The first one is looking at apocalypse as the business as usual. So the idea is that in these backcasting scenario workshops, the community, so that if we are heading towards apocalypse, that is because there were no leadership in the movement, and the local authorities have abandoned the people, and they envisioned that there was actually a tipping point with the presidential election back in 2017, when the whole constitutional system was whole parliamentary system was thrown under the bus. And for them, there was nothing else to do but to just try to address minor issues, which they can, and destruction of the rule of law was the tipping point for them. So in the second scenario, which they titled as Going Low Crawl, this was the kind of second best, or if you wish, second worst scenario. They said that there was some sort of a community organization, even though particular sectors lost their importance due to this heavy buildup of energy sectors in the region. They still could limit the expansion. They couldn't preserve the identity of the town, but at least they could establish some sort of a reparations mechanism through a legal structure. And basically the last one, which was the more utopian scenarios that was kind of put forward by the community, was that they called it civilian uprising. So looking at how the macro conditions in terms of democracy in the country have changed. They weren't sure if it would be because of them, or more of a collective shift in the country. But they came to the conclusion that actually it was, at the end of it all, an assemblage of different opposition groups that enabled them to stop the expansion of fossil fuel expansion in the region, the buildup of industries, particularly polluting petrochemical industries in the region. And they basically saw an opportunity also to consider how to democratize renewable energy in the regions. They didn't really see renewable energy as a solution to everything, but they also kind of questioned how and why of renewable energy. So basically, in a nutshell, they argued that the structural transformation of economy and society over the past 2 decades took its toll, not only on physical environments, but also on the capacity of grassroots organizations, and a clear deterioration of rule of law and authoritarian the coming of the authoritarian state basically limited particular energy futures for them. So what they're fighting for is not a utopian future, but they're fighting to kind of stop the worst from happening. So that was the kind of the agency that came to the front. So I think I'm running out of time. So in lieu of a conclusion, I would like to suggest that our findings here preliminarily hint at the unruly politics of transformation across different levels, different scales, and these are cascading. So transformations doesn't happen in a macro level, but they basically happen as matrushkas. So once they start, it's more like domino effect. And as Ian Skunis and Andy Sterling calls it, actually these type of unruly politics of transformations create new meanings and experiments for environmental movements. They particularly call for more diverse, emergent, and unruly political alignments. So basically, a grassroots community group collaborating with an international platform, bringing on board the local municipality to resist the state, and different configurations. And this requires some ingenuity, some innovation, but also it's about the knowledges that are created in the region. So as Turkey changes, it also changes Aliya region, but also as Aliya region changes, it also changes Turkey. So these relations are two-way. And the key challenge we observed there was the lack of alternatives against the state power. So again, the best case scenario is the one that's next to the worst. But we still think, and the community, as we understand, still thinks that new political opportunities are emerging, and these are captured by social movements to avoid the worst case scenarios. So in that regard, maybe to wrap up, as Knappe and others maintained in their piece from 2019, acknowledging the co-production and relationality of future visions and energy transition can pave the way to a better construction of diverse future visions coming from public and civil society organizations. So I think it's important that this exercise is kind of kept on to build up further alternatives. And I will stop here, and thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot. We already have questions in the chat. You're all invited to post your question in the chat. And there is one that asked whether the scenarios you mentioned, the three scenarios, where they are mutually exclusive. There's a question that one can be pessimistic about the here or the present, but still have hope for the future.
Yeah.
And the second one, maybe you can answer both of them, is how are the three scenarios linked to hegemonic power? Which is most probable?
Yeah. So, well, thank you for these questions. I think it's really great. This also helps us to think, well, we didn't necessarily consider the scenarios as mutually exclusive. And I have to admit that this was the biggest challenge in our scenario workshops, because community really struggled to think of distinct future scenarios. For them, everything was pretty terrible. So all of those different scenarios often in our discussions were merged into the most pessimistic scenario. But we still wanted to kind of ask them to split these and see which pathways could lead to potentially benign futures. So about which one is most probable, well, according to the community, actually, they think the apocalypse as business as usual is the most probable, but they say that their raison d'etre, the reason why they fight is to make sure not to reach the best scenario, which for them is not that realistic, but to avoid the worst case. So they see their role as kind of constituting a double movement in the Polanyian sense, as kind of confronting the state power, confronting the hegemonic power to avoid the worst fate in the region. And the role of utopia and imagination of the future, I think this is a great question. This is, again, an issue that we faced because most of the members of this community-based organization, Yenifoça Forum, are retired citizens who settled in the region over the past 20, 25 years. So there are few young people among the community group, which we believe that actually limits this utopian imagination to some extent as well. They do their best to recruit young people in the region, but they haven't been particularly successful on that. So there is also this issue about kind of just giving up from more utopian visions of future, but actually fighting to stop the worst case. So yeah, I mean, I think this is a challenge. Trying to imagine the best futures also depends on the composition of the social movement that we were working with. And the last question is what's the role of local political figures, mayors in the movements? Well, actually, this was a very interesting issue, and thanks for this question, because we have seen that the community reflected on its past, particularly with a focus on how they managed to bring together different stakeholders, including local authorities, MPs in the parliament in Ankara, international organizations, but also villagers and so on. So basically, they understand the success of 1990s and how they managed to stop the coal-fired power plant by looking at this massive coalition of multi-scalar struggles happening both in courtrooms, but also on the street, but also happening between the local authorities and the central state. Whereas now, they really have a big challenge in kind of bringing the mayors on board. The demonstration that I have shown at the beginning from 2016 was one of those exceptional moments in which they managed to bring the local authorities on board. But I have to admit that this is not the case all the time. So they really struggle to have the local authorities on their side now, which also somewhat curtails the effectiveness of their resistance.
I've got one last question regarding the effects of thinking about these scenarios. If I got it right, that was an idea you had within your research, right? This was not the idea of the community. Well, they probably wouldn't have done the scenario thinking if you as researchers wouldn't have made the proposal, right?
Could you just repeat that? I think I missed the first bit.
Well, I was wondering, you as researchers, you proposed them to think about the different possible scenarios, right?
Yeah, correct.
So I was wondering, when you proposed it to them, were they from the beginning very eager to do this, and what was the effect of it? Like, what does the community see themselves an effect of thinking about different scenarios?
I mean, it was so basically, maybe I should put this slide on. It was a interesting experiment for them, because I mean, these are not really the people who are used to doing these scenario workshops. Again, as I said, these are mostly people who are retired. Most of them are over 50, 60 years of age. And basically, this was kind of something new for them. It was experimental. And they wanted to kind of experiment, not only trying to think about alternative futures, but also using different visual tools. Here, we asked them to prepare posters of different futures. So they worked in groups and prepared this. And they basically said that, okay, I mean, we never thought of these. So it was something new for them in that regard. But at the end of our sessions, they said that, I mean, this was a good exercise to also consider their organization and what they can achieve and what they cannot achieve. So it was some sort of a reality check for them to kind of know the boundaries of their effectiveness. But frankly speaking, I mean, they didn't really have this capacity, or they didn't really think of doing these future visions on their own. They are really, really busy with day-to-day struggles.
Yeah, thank you a lot for a very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
And now we move on to Ala and Musna. Musna is an independent researcher, and Ala is works at the University College London. The camera's working. That's good news. And they present.
I did some emergency measures and got my 9-year-old son's laptop.
And they present a very current research on energy imaginations within the struggle in Lebanon.
So hello everybody, thanks Timo. Actually, before further introductions, I want to plunge with you right away to the context in Lebanon. So just a few days ago, a Speaker of the House, Nabih Berri, threatened us after 6 months in the country without having a government, while the country is managed by a caretaker government after the Prime Minister has resigned, that if a government is not formed by April, there will be no country and no electricity. The link that Mr. Berri makes between the country and the electricity is the key, like a key thread we're taking with us today, because it's not his alone. It's actually for a large part of Lebanon's recent history, the fate and the conditions of the energy sector have been closely tied to the fate of the energy sector, both in terms of financially and in terms of the state of corruption, but also more symbolically. The failures in the energy sector have very often been linked to a failure in the state. Abi Ghanem, who I think is with us in the audience today, has documented how the kind of the post-war kind of reconstruction was very linked to provision of 24-hour electricity, and 30 years on after the end of the Civil War, we still do not have 24-hour electricity, and that kind of project of post-war reconstruction, post-war rebuilding is not complete. But also, in large part because of the huge corruption in the energy sector, in terms of at various levels, in terms of fuel import and subsidies, in terms of renting energy, Turkish power budgets since 2012 that are costing yearly something like $800 million. So that corruption in electricity provision has a lot of impact on the overall state budget. So now in Lebanon, like since 2019, Lebanon has plunged into like a huge financial crisis, and energy has been a key phase of it, or the problems in the electricity sector in particular. After a period of demonstrations and political mobilization that many has termed as a revolution, was no surprise that electricity was one of the key issues that was an issue, a cause of dissent. That kind of went with a very fast deterioration of the Lebanese currency, plunging people into poverty. And then, just to give you a bit of the moment we're in August 2020, which you probably all know, the huge port explosion in the port, causing like further damage to the country, has also caused symbolically maybe to further damage to the Électricité du Liban, the electricity company that is responsible for provision of electricity in the country. But in a way, bringing these two together, just describe the moment, since we're talking about futures and utopias and imaginaries, the sort of image of the future of both the state, the country, and the sector is actually quite dystopic. It's much like Berry has said at the beginning, there will be the kind of popular sentiment in relation to both state and electricity is that that we are heading towards a dystopic future. There are no kind of mostly positive imaginaries of what could happen. So that's just the sentiment of the moment we're in. And maybe Ala can continue with more numbers on what that actually means. If Ala manages to.
Sorry, I'm just trying to switch the mic on. Thanks a lot, Musna. I just want to talk about the energy sector very briefly. The national production of energy declined by 20% last year in 2020.
It's not very, I don't know if it's just me or if it's not that clear.
Hello, is it clear? Can you hear me? No? Musna, you might have to carry on. Hello? Sorry. Okay,
yes, now I can hear what you said. Okay, so just to give a brief of the actual situation of the energy sector, there's serious energy supply shortage. By numbers, ADL provides only 63% of the needs of energy in the country. In practice, this means that in some places of the country, people receive less than 12 hours per day of energy supply. In 2020, national production has already fallen by 20%. And with the financial crisis and probably the inability to secure dollars to subsidize fuel, the risk of facing longer hours of blackouts in the coming month is real. Of course, ADL continues to subsidize losses, estimated at like 1.8 billion in 2018. And then ADL, Électricité du Liban, continues to charge tariffs that are well below its costs. So, and it's the same tariff since 1994, parallel with very low collection of bills at around 20% from normal rates. So I don't know when Ala will come to this. So within that kind of context, there was a moment that, like a different political moment in 2019. And we sought to kind of bring back that discussion on energy within that kind of political discussion. We thought that our project was centered around discussing what kind of visions do we want for energy. Hi, Ala.
Hi, sorry.
Do you want to try? Don't worry.
Does this work now? Sorry.
Yes, excellent.
Okay.
Where
did you read?
Not, I just described the electricity context, the previous. So I'll handle.
Yeah. Thanks. So, I mean, me and Musna had been working together previously, and we were organizing workshops, in closed spaces like the UN and Esquire and other places with, invitation only. And when the mobilization and uprising broke, we realized that there's an issue with the way we talk about energy ourselves, and we're complicit in this in this structure. And there was a need to engage with the wider public on this, given that there's a strong energy momentum and a strong history of deliberation activities in Lebanon and discussion. There's a relative level of freedom of speech in that extent in terms of assembly and gathering and expression. And it felt like this conversation needs to be wider and broader, this conversation around energy justice and energy futures. So in essence, embarking on the planning and design of a citizen assembly was building on that tradition of both expression, protest, and deliberation, but focusing on the key issue, which is that this crisis is affecting the economy, is affecting people's quality of life. So the principles of these citizen assemblies and the construction of these mini publics in a sort of deliberative process has a certain set of agreed sort of set of principles around equitable participation, the participatory and pedagogical process, information and knowledge sharing, and the need for facilitation. Because in a kind of multi-confessional space like Lebanon, how do we create the kind of utopian space to perform a process which can deliver a collective vision of the future? So this was, you know, when we had to kind of, in starting to plan this method, engage with the public about the idea of this. And so there was a kind of work that went into explaining what a citizen assembly is. It's not just importing a concept from abroad and trying to apply it. It's really to make it emerge from within. And we see in the spaces that are created in the protests, these lectures and seminars and discussions and debates. It was to move that into a space where it's a bit more planned and organized. So what we did with this citizen assembly, we were already working and had a large citizen science team in a neighborhood of Hamra, which is a sort of university intellectual hub of Beirut. It's kind of it has a heterogeneous and diverse population, multi-confessional, multi-sectarian, and it was a good place, we thought, to start, because we had, a household, we had kind of the research infrastructure there and support to run this. It was a pilot. It wasn't a full-scale citizen assembly. It was just to kind of launch this method and the concept to see what kind of adaptation and localization process it would entail. So this was from the research point of view. From the practical point of view of what we were trying to achieve within the citizen assembly, it was to answer 3 or 4 key questions, which will explain our empirical findings on after this. I won't dwell on it, but again, it's really the other key as a method we were trying to experiment with was breaking down the boundaries between the energy specialists we'd always worked with, the citizen science research idea that we had, and members of this community. And other stakeholders within the community. So we had a long co-production process before the assembly took place in the co-design of the assembly itself. And we thought also, as another kind of objective, is to integrate our research outputs through the community, cascade that. So breaking down as academics, how we usually disseminate our research and outputs. Can data be used for advocacy? Not just publishing a report and assuming it will lead to a path that will create influence of some kind. It's really to say, here's the data that maybe will help in some way. But it's also a learning for us as academics. The citizen assembly becomes a site of research and data collection, in the sense of it's a space where people can share their lived experience. Okay. But the question was, we faced challenges from the beginning, decisions that had to be made by the organizers. Who takes part, for example? Do we invite the government into this space? Given the disjuncture between citizen and state that's happened, and the demarcation of boundaries, we agreed to send an invitation in principle, at least, because there were assumptions that we were making about whether the government officials that we had previously been worked with and would invite, and who would come along with no problems in our previous workshops, what would they do now? Where do they stand on public participation? So we sent the invitation to our members of officials who work for the Ministry of energy in Lebanon and other officials that are working in the leading the renewable energy sort of organizations within the ministry. And these are the responses that we got, which are telling in and of themselves. The first official said it's absolutely absurd to talk about sustainable energy, whereas a country is falling into poverty and hunger, especially given the nature of the event that you're proposing. Since the audience is mainly of citizens, question marks, we believe that it would be harmful to talk about policies and priorities at this stage. The impact would be rather negative and demotivating. So complete, discouraging sort of statement about where citizens' place is and the timing of this. The second official said, I don't believe in the need of building alternative democratic mechanisms for deliberation when it comes to technical specialized issues when such democracies between experts and common people that have no clue about the subject. Democracy and deliberation among the experts is the common practice that is safe and sound. Anything else can only lead to chaos. So these responses really demarcated the place where, from the official government point of view, of where the citizen is and where the state lies on this, and that there was no space for both to come together. So there was a complete rejection in having towards the idea of having a state role within the citizen assembly. So just to move on quickly from that, just to demonstrate this method, how kind of time consuming, how costly and how labor intensive it is. The planning phase kind of consists of, stratified sampling methods to get a fair representative sample from the community. Communication campaign, people have not heard of a sort of a people or a citizens assembly in this way. So how do we begin to translate that? There was a lot of work, the wording, what's the translation of citizen that's appropriate, assembly, what would actually feel holistic and organic and natural here. So there was kind of a long testing just of the key ideas in terms of the citizen assembly. Who would be invited to speak? Who has the right to present? At the end, we invited anyone in the stakeholder that had a meaningful intervention to make on any of the questions. The facilitators have to be independent and professional. You can't always assume an academic can take on that role. It has to be someone who is can lead the process of deliberation to ensure inclusivity and equity within the groups. And the logistics. Of course, we ran the citizen assembly just last year. It was it was just before the second lockdown in Lebanon. There was a small window of opportunity and lots of social distancing measures that we had to think about. But there was an agreement that these kind of things need to take place physically because people don't know each other and there's a level of familiarity. But we used a hybrid model in which people would consume some of the information digitally, but have the deliberation took place physically in shortened sessions and duration. And we extended those sessions over multiple days rather than having them sort of over kind of an intensive long day process. So these are the kind of adaptations that measures we took. Musna, you want to talk about the results, the empirical findings?
Yeah, thank you, Ala. I think so. The question is, what did we find out, from engaging the citizens? What did we hear from them? One of the questions we asked is what the kind of energy mix we want from Lebanon. So we had a few presentations on that, and despite having two experts in the room proposing that we get that it is very realistic to get 50% of Lebanon's energy from renewables, and the third expert proposing something between 25 and 50%. And when the government commitment is to have 30% of Lebanon's energy from renewables by 2030, the citizens in the room voted for just 26% out of renewables. Why is that? This, we believe, stems from several reasons. One, the first is lack of trust in state institutions and its ability to achieve even the 30% that it committed to, particularly given that kind of all the imaginations related to renewables were linked to the central state and the central state being able to perform its role. The second is a desire to work on solutions that target several problems at the same time. The presentation that inspired participants most was like this last minute add-on by us, the organizers, that presented a view of biofuel and the possibility to resolve Lebanon's electricity crisis by something that is that combines solving also the garbage crisis. If in 2015 Lebanon was faced by a severe garbage crisis that remains unresolved, and the citizens sort of proposed or led us through a vision that was very clearly one that integrated, that solves several problems at the same time. Just to explain this further, it's 2 minutes or?
Yeah.
Okay. So this becomes even more evident when considering the elements of energy justice that participants prioritized. So basically, they were asked to rank the kind of 10 principles from Sophocles on energy justice and vote for the top 3. And consistently, in 2 votes, we had affordability, availability as like a priority, followed by responsibility, sustainability, and accountability. And so probably the priorities remained more or less the same, stressing these, knowing that there are daily power cuts. And in the month prior to the CA, we've reached 12 hours of power cuts per day in the Hamra, the area where the CA was taking place. And even the choice of sustainability, we're not sure people understood it as environmental sustainability, but more as durable solutions. Okay, but so taking this forward, why has the kind of the choice of the renewables take precedence? We believe that there were 4 kind of competing energy imaginaries. One, the dominant one that is promoted by the state is a fossil fuel one, with the hope that we have gas in the Mediterranean and suddenly all of our energy, and apologies for the typo there, all of our energy would be resolved through the gas that we will explore. Another is one of renewables that is promoted by the international aid racket and comes with a very strong modernist imaginary, and that to a large part the state pays lip service to it to satisfy the kind of international aid community. A third is a decentralized, privatized kind of solution that relies on microgrids, on local solutions, but with central state regulation that is largely promoted by some of the energy experts in that energy discourse. But then there was in parallel this dystopic citizens view that sort of, in response to this dystopic citizen view, that sought autonomy from the central government, wanted a solution that is like resolves the everyday life problems. There was that kind of proposal of a circular, interconnected, and autonomous proposition. I don't know if we have time for a few conclusions to add to this, but basically from here, does the kind of format of a CA, that kind of exercise of many publics, does it allow that space for imagination in that discussion at this kind of political, very dystopic moment? This is what we thought to explore. And I don't know if we have, Dynasty, now an answer, but I will wait for your discussion questions to resolve that, especially since Allah left us.
Okay. But I decided I can actually, if you want to, I can all move you to speaker so you can speak up yourself. And everybody who feels that he or she wants to pose a question, just unmute yourself and everybody should be speaker now. You only have to make sure that you switch off your microphone and your camera while someone is presenting. But now you should all be able to speak. So who wants to pose a question? Maybe you want to switch off your presentation, and then we can see each other better. If you put on their camera. Julian, do you want to pose a question, or what is the symbol you are?
Yes, that's
yeah, just go ahead.
Raising my hands. Yeah, I wondered about those 26% renewable energies the citizens voted for, so that they expect or want 1/4 of renewable energies in the future. And you explained this by a lack of trust in state institutions. And I wondered if this is really lack of trust in state institutions, or if it's a lack of trust in renewable energies.
To start with, it's definitely it's lack of trust in central state institutions. So just to differentiate between the local authorities, so there was this kind of okay, if the municipality can do it. I think there was that kind of modernist imaginary. It comes from renewables, did not capture people's imagination. It wasn't as tangible. If you've seen in the presentation, one of the pictures I've put is of this kind of small rooftop mini solar panel, and on top of like a local organization's roof in the Burj al-Baraj, the refugee camp in Beirut. And you could see that in large part, I think the practices people have seen of renewables at the small scale have been ones that are very performative, not they're just paying this kind of selling the idea, performing to many international donors that we're doing something in relation to renewables, but it has not had direct positive impact on the lives of people. So you have a lot of these small, that project has 3-4 local and international organizations partnering in it. One of them is environmental, funded by the Norwegian embassy, and is so I think a lot of the people have seen this kind of performance, but they haven't felt the value or actually the possibility, the reality of renewables. And they feel that for that to happen, it needs to come with state power, and that state power is not there. I don't know if you'd like to add anything to that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. The issue, if we were to think about what would generate sort of a first wave energy transition or consumer-led, demand changes, people want 24-hour electricity, but the idea that is a priority. How that's solved, if it can be related or linked to climate change, the climate change discourse, not just in Lebanon, I think in the broader Middle East, isn't as understood or felt in the same way as it is here in the West. This is not something we explored. Experts talked about the Paris Agreement, the state's obligation in terms of renewable energy targets, but it's not. Our presenters focused on air pollution, local air pollution, for example. So the idea of a 2030 or 2050 in terms of a temporal horizon around climate change isn't digested or appreciated in the same way as it is in the West broadly. But I didn't actually hear the question. Sorry, I had another.
Yeah, but that's excellent. It's a good reminder, if I may add, because with the whole discussion on, even with so the power shortage is kind of fulfilled by these kind of private generators that are very polluting. And we had a presentation on the environmental impact and the health impact of these private generators that use diesel. But still, despite people complaining of that kind of pollution and linking it up to noise pollution that wasn't mentioned by, there was the climate kind of impact. It just was too far away. It wasn't part of what they were positioned. There was a more acute, immediate, daily impact of resolving the issue of availability.
Okay, we have time for one last question, which is in the chat. The question is, in your experience, how difficult or easy it was to decouple the discussion from broader state failures? And that was the context, right? Yeah, maybe you can answer this question or comment on it.
Wasn't it? Do you want to go or shall I go?
Go ahead.
For us, it was starting at the local level. Could we the different scales? How do you then, within this group of people, introduce national level problems? The municipality, local, like the district level problems, and the neighborhood level problems. And because the energy system is obviously a complex, multi-scalar problem. And there was pros and cons with that kind of, can we encourage them through sort of their own agency to think of the local and build up to think also of the national? Or are they able to overcome the complete decline of the infrastructure services that the state provides at the top level, from the top down, and how they pursue that? And I think that's, as we explained in the question on where should we get our energy from, the problem of state failure influence people's ability to think of more ambitious targets. So I wouldn't suggest it was biased, but experts kind of really tried to push the imaginary toward the possibility, or at least it's feasible for, aside from these state failures, to achieve an ambitious target. They weren't able to overcome that because, even if it was just utopian, we were trying to just open up the possibilities, even if it was unrealistic or utopian, because of state failure, to say, look, there is a better world that's possible. There was a limit to that. What do you think? Do you want to add?
Yeah. I think you covered it. Mostly autonomy that they wanted from the state. So this decoupling is not, we didn't achieve it that well. It's just that the people continued to see it linked to it, and they thought of the solution as something that kind of distances them from the state in general, because it's by necessity a failure.
I mean, to the problem. Sorry, just to add to the problem that even having a government official in the room would have maybe skewed it completely to this problem of state failure, because when there is that tension and that it would have been risky, even had they accepted our invitation to have them there in the room. It could possibly skewed it to focus on the state failure another way. But it influenced the discussion without them being there anyway.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your really interesting presentation. And now we move on to Victoria and Tobias. They both work at an institute in Potsdam, IASS, and they work on common sense imaginations in the context of the German coal phase-out.
Yeah, thank you, Timo. We're presenting today. I open the presentation. We're talking today about the Energiewende and common sense, and give some perspectives from Lusatia. Tobias and I were working in a research project on structural change in Lusatia at the IASS in Potsdam. And since autumn 2018, we have been working and traveling in Lusatia. That's a region, 2 hours from Berlin, in Brandenburg, Saxony, and also parts of Poland. And that's part of our research project, Structural Social Change in Lusatia at the IASS in Potsdam. And the topic that we come across and again is the conviction that the German coal phase-out provokes a blackout in the country. And at the beginning of last year, we decided to take a closer look at the blackout narrative, and we had already established context through other projects within our research project. For example, we did a 1-year workshop cycle with trainees from LIAG, that's the local lignite company. And shortly before our research project should start, the COVID-19 pandemic made our research stay impossible. So unfortunately, we are therefore unable to present the results of our research project today. However, we will present and discuss our research plan and some quotes that we have already recorded during our workshops with the LIAG trainees. And so let's start with a short insight into the lignite company LIAG and the quotes. So in the picture below on the left, you can see the entrance gate to the Jenswalde power plant. And this is where the training center is, and that's where we did the workshops. And I don't know if you can see it, probably not, but there's a banner hangs above the entrance door that employees have hang up. And it says, quote, to politicians, Energiewende, question mark, or energy transition, first explain how it works, then prove that it is possible, and only then do further intervention. And I think this quote already shows that there is a great deal of skepticism about the energy transition within the LIAC workforce. And also our previous research shows that this skepticism has diverse roots. And among other things, the deeply rooted identity as an energy or coal region, the fear of a renewed structural break, but also the conviction that the coal phase out could lead to another or to blackout. And especially older employees in particular refer to the winter of 1978, 1979. It was in the GDR at that time, when the coal was frozen at -20 degrees and the electricity suddenly went off. And this experience of energy break is deeply ingrained in the local memory. And also the trainees in our workshops refer to this event, but more often they refer to the book Blackout by Mark Ellsberg. I don't know, some of you maybe know this book. And that's interesting because the trainees are not against the energy transition per se, but they are convinced that too little has been invested in research on alternative energies in the past 30 years, and that they are the ones who have to pay for it now. And that's unfair in their opinion. And one trainee explicitly speaks of his fear of blackout and says, that's my translation now, quote, renewable energy is not capable of base loads. If you get out of coal, you should keep nuclear power. Atom is more climate friendly than anything else. Renewable energies lead to a lot of fluctuations in the grid. The network has to be kept at 50 Hertz. Otherwise, you quickly have a blackout. Okay, so much for getting in the mood for the topic now. And now we'll briefly introduce Lusatia as a region and then introduce our research project on the blackout narrative. And then Tobias and I would like to discuss our research hypothesis with you. Okay. Yeah, Lusatia as a region and its history. As I already mentioned, Lusatia is a region in Brandenburg, Saxony, and parts of Poland. And you can see at least the German part of Lusatia on the map right. And there's also the training center at the Jenswalde power plant shown at point 1. That's the point, at the top. And in Lusatia, there is the second largest German lignite mining district located, and therefore also infrastructure and economic structure is deeply influenced by energy and mining sectors. And today there are around 7,000 people still work in the coal industry. However, the number of employees has decreased significantly since the German reunification in 1989, 1990. Because, and that's very interesting, in 1990, 80,000 people were employed in the coal industry. Now there are 7,000 people employed in the coal industry. So you can see Lusatia has already undergone a big structural change that has led to massive deindustrialization. And they have fear that, that the 7,000 people again lose their jobs. So that's a big issue in the region. And these experiences of the structural break and also the traditional experiences of a lack of energy in the 1970s, I told you about it formerly, we think prepare the breeding ground for the blackout narrative. And this is now where our research project starts, and we decided to do some kind of Gramscian ethnography, we call it. And we are interested in how the widespread belief in a blackout is related to the history of Lusatia. And current conflicts are over coal phasing out and the expansion of wind energy. And we see the energy transition as a conflict of hegemony at that point. And we are planning to contrast the arguments of employees in the lignite industry who have to reorient themselves professionally due to the energy transition with the arguments of employees in the wind energy sector. And we plan to explore the research question by referring to the concept of common sense, according to Gramsci. And the concept refers to the fact that the common sense of individuals is constituted by their own experiences, education, and also social practices. And it is usually to a certain extent incoherent. And our aim is here not to make the common sense coherent in the sense of Gramsci, but to produce some kind of revolutionary, or to produce a revolutionary class consciousness or something like that. Rather, we are concerned with exploring the common sense of workers in the coal and wind industry in order to possibly derive insights into how participation in the collective shaping of the Energiewende could be feasible. And by means of ethnographic conversation, we uncover the respective construction of meaning around the formability of the Energiewende and the fear of the blackout. And we're planning to hold around 20 interviews with workers, and we would like to analyze documents, press articles, and position paper that make it somehow easier for us to access their chains of argumentation. And which is quite interesting. You can see here some sources which are interesting in that context, because on the left-hand side, for example, you can see the Lausebande magazine, that's a local magazine. And in this magazine, climate change has been negated several times, and also the blackout narrative is conjured up. And the Lausebande is especially interesting for us because it is a parent and child magazine that ends up in every letterbox in Lusatia as a supplement of the local newspaper. And I mean, it's not an explicitly right-wing hate speech or something like that. That is especially interesting when we're talking about the common sense. So that's, I mean, it's a magazine and it's in every letterbox and it forms somehow the common sense. And the blackout book, I already told you about that in the beginning because the trainees refer to it. Yeah, I mean, that's a book. I guess some of you also know it. Okay, yeah, based on these considerations and experiences in the field, we would like to discuss with you some hypotheses we developed, and I briefly introduce them, and then we can start the discussion. The first one is that the blackout reception goes hand in hand with strong fears of the future. Secondly, we think that labor is important for creating an identity, and the blackout discourse catches, or therefore the blackout discourse catches on more with LIAC than with Vestas employees. Vestas is the local wind company. And the third one is that the blackout discourse blocks visions of the future that are more than an extension of the present. And thank you very much for listening, and we look forward discussing the questions. And maybe Tobias joins. Yeah, perfect.
You can pose questions. You can either write in the chat if you want to, or you can unmute yourself, or make this little star in the chat, and I know you want to speak. So, are there any questions? If people still need some time, I'm very interested in the first sentence here on this slide regarding the fear. I think it's very. I agree with you, but I was wondering where comes this big fear from? That's really strange. But I think you're right that it's very important for your research. But maybe do you also have some more ideas? Where does it come from?
Maybe I start and then you continue, Tobias. Yeah, I already told you about this blackout situation that already happened in the 1970s, and I think that was really in the GDR that was a big moment because the whole country was out of energy. So there was no possibility because the coal was frozen, and I think that's. Yeah, that's a big thing in Lusatia, and that's ingrained in the local memory. And I think, yeah, that's not a rational fear; that's an irrational fear. So.
Yeah, and I think what we could also do in our research is analysis of the media and. Victoria also mentioned the Lausebande. There's also, we suppose that there's a kind of strategy to pose a threat for the energy transition and to make the people having a fear for further growth of renewables and so on. So. We think that there's also a strategic moment, but we should go deeper into the analysis to prove this hypothesis.
Yeah, thank you for the. Do you think that fear of blackout is stronger than in Lusatia than it is in other parts of Germany? I mean, is it a general effect or is it caused by the history?
Yeah, we think that it's much stronger in Lusatia than in other areas within Germany. I think it's fair to say that the blackout discourse or the fear of blackout is nothing that is only limited to Lusatia. It was also used already back in the 1970s when the government wanted to establish nuclear power plants. They said, oh, if there's so much protest and we cannot build this plant, then we will have blackouts and so on. And a lot of power plants weren't built, and still the number of blackouts in Germany is very low. So there's a kind of long tradition of the blackout discourse, but in Lusatia it plays out in a special way. And it's really interesting. If you are in Lusatia, the blackout discourse is really very prominent, and this has to do with local strategies to organize consent for the coal mining, because for coal companies and also for the governments who defended the coal industry since ever, it's easier to defend it if there's a kind of fear or questioning of the alternatives to coal. That's why we think that the blackout discourse is much more prominent in Lusatia than in the other parts of Germany.
Do you read the questions yourself, or shall I read them out to you in the chat? Maybe you can start with the one with the Gramscian ethnography, because we talked more about the other one. I myself was comparing the blackout to the oil crisis and why one has an effect and the other not. Yeah. Maybe you can start with the methodological question.
Yeah, I can start with the methodological question. The Gramscian ethnography. I mean, the common sense concept. You try to reveal the argumentation behind your common sense, and that it's important that you talk to people like in their normal setting, and that they have. that you have like a normal conversation with them, and that's kind of the ethnographic setting, because we're going into the local lignite company, and then we're trying to trigger this blackout discourse, or to find situations where people talk about that, and then we try to reconstruct their argumentation and to reveal the concepts which lie behind their argumentation. And so that is why it wasn't possible to do this research, actually, because we were not allowed to go into the local lignite company at that time, because they have so much troubles with the COVID-19 pandemic and everything. And so this ethnographic approach actually was not possible, because we have to hanging around on the field, something like that. So, does it answer your question, Musnad? And then Tobias, maybe you can continue with the oil crisis.
Yes, okay. Well, I think at least for Lusatia, the hard winter is much more important than the oil crisis. Probably also because the oil crisis in the 70s made access to petroleum more difficult or restricted it, and there were the car-free Sundays, which anti-car activists really would appreciate to have again. I think as it is related to specifically to electricity, the winter of 78, 79 is much more important for Lusatia than the oil crisis.
Do you want to answer the question in the chat? Who are the actors in the region that are combating the blackout narrative? What strategies are used thereby? I'm assuming there's actors that have a different take on this in the region too.
Well, there's, for example, Grüne Liga, which is an important environmental network that is opposing the further extension of coal mining in Lusatia, and several other actors. We didn't focus on their strategies, but for sure they do. So they are present in social media. They do events, and for sure they also refer to employment opportunities in renewable energies. And Brandenburg especially has a quite high share of renewable energy as well. There are a lot of wind power plants and also solar power plants. So I think this is an aspect they underline. And apart from that, I think that they also try to explain that the share of renewables in the German grid is already, it was about 50% last year. And the grid stability increased with the increase of the share of renewables. So they also underline this aspect. So I think they try to show that the danger for blackout is not very substantiated by the real developments.
I have another question regarding your ethnographic approach. You said you already made contacts and all, and I was wondering, didn't you have problems getting in contact and making arrangements? Because obviously if people Google you, they know what kind of normative position you are taking in the conflict about the coal phase out. So I was wondering if that played a big role or not.
Yeah, that's a very interesting and very good question. Yeah, we started or we get in contact with the local lignite company LIAG with trainee workshops, and they started because a mayor came to us and said, we have fear that all the young people leaving the region, and the young people who are good educated are the people who work or most probably work at LIAG. So we want to know how they see the structural change and how they can or what is important for them to create the structural change in Lusatia. And that is why we went to the LIAG and said, okay, we would like to talk about the structural change in Lusatia. And so it was not directly the blackout narrative we talked about. We talked about the structural change and where they live and if they like to live in the region and what is important for them, structural change and something like that. And then at some point or another point, the blackout narrative came up. So yeah, but it was definitely it was not a problem, but it was some kind of, we had to get in contact to another. We had to, it took some time before really the trainees talked. Yeah. And we had workshop. We had 7 workshops, so we had some time to get to know each other. So, and it was okay because we said we have this room here, and we can talk about everything, and you can say what you ever need to say. So, and we're not it was a safe space somehow. We're not judging the people. And it was also okay to talk about a blackout. We were not saying, we said we don't believe in a blackout because A, B, C, D, but it was okay that they could say we believe in a blackout. So yeah, and I think it was important that the people really talked.
Yeah, and just to add on it, I think as there's now a fixed coal phase out in Germany until 2038, it makes communication much easier, and also cooperation between a sustainability institute and a coal company like LIAG. And yeah, regarding Vestas, which has production facility in Lauchhammer in Lusatia, we were close to getting in touch with them, but then Corona came, and we didn't further develop this contact.
Okay, thanks a lot. Is there any more question? We would have time for 1 or 2 more. Does anyone want to unmute herself or himself? Okay, then thank you a lot, and we move on to our last presentation, which is by Julian, and he works at the University in Munich, and he presents something on energy imaginations in the context of an energy region in the south of Germany, in Bavaria.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, I don't work there at LMU anymore, but right now I work as a campaigner for an anti-nuclear NGO, but still the results I show you stem from a research project which we did in the last years in southern Germany. When the new cannot be born, internalized acceptance and common sense constructions of the energy transition in the silent majority. So there's a lot of research on the social political acceptance of the energy transition, key stakeholders, political processes, specific conflicts. We heard a lot about it in the last presentations. There's also a lot of quantitative research and opinion polls, which usually, at least in Germany, show support for the energy transition. However, I think there's something missing, and this something which is missing can only be captured qualitatively. So the broad population influences how all these political processes develop, and also the political processes loop back on the broader population, on the broader opinion. So qualitative research is necessary on the everyday discussions in the silent majority to understand conflicts, action, and most importantly, also non-action. So I adopted a broadly Gramscian perspective and asked, how do different social milieus discuss and construct the energy transition? I think this is rather similar to maybe what Tobias wants to do, or what I do in Lusatia, but I don't want to focus on the on people who are involved in the one side or on the other, but in the broader population. So my focus is social acceptance, socio-political acceptance in the model by Wüstenhagen and others. So socio-political acceptance in its broadest forms, in contrast to community acceptance of specific projects or siting decisions, and also in contrast to market acceptance. I think social acceptance has to be understood in terms of hegemony, rule by consent, rule by discourse, economic concessions, and this thing called hegemony, I think you have to look upon it, you have to search it in a common sense, in the everyday thinking, in the explicit, but also in the implicit knowledge, and also in the routine practices of different social groups. So social acceptance of the energy transition is a question of its common sense construction. I did 20 group discussions in a silent majority in a renewable energy region in southern Bavaria. I recruited them via different social associations, sports clubs, Lions Club, also folklore societies, Trachtenverein, for those who are able to speak German. And I tried to cover different social milieus, but I didn't expect a certain stance and knowledge of renewable energies. So I really wanted to know what people would talk about if they talk about, in the pub, at different social settings. I analyzed these group discussions according to discourse analysis. So what is said and known, which discourses are relevant, and then also using the documentary method, which also takes into account how the participants discuss, how the discussions develop, which also reveals implicit patterns in the discussions. The results, I think you have to differentiate between the normative acceptance of renewable energies, that is saying, yes, I want renewable energies or the energy transition, and the everyday acceptance. There are different tools of innocence and order which are used to bridge the void between these two types of acceptance. And the good life appearing in these group discussions is a life based on a business as usual, despite a nagging feeling that this business as usual can't persist. So normative acceptance. All of the groups said, yes, I'm in favor of renewable energies, at least in principle. Yes, I want it, something has to be done. So it has become a norm to agree to the energy transition. However, this is very different from the everyday acceptance. If you take a closer look, you can see that a future based on renewable energies is not imaginable and or not wanted, despite this normative acceptance. That is, you have to discern this normative acceptance and the everyday acceptance within this social political acceptance. And I think this everyday acceptance is somehow situated in between, also halfway to the community acceptance, as it is driven, I would say, also by fear of potential expansion projects. I think this difference between these two types of acceptance is a sign of an ongoing crisis of hegemony. The old nuclear fossil energy system is dying, is not feasible anymore, but also the new renewable energy system cannot be born. You cannot imagine that it really will work. I thank you, Tobias, by the way, for hinting me to this quotation. There are, in the situation, there are different tools of innocence and order which bridge this void. Tools of innocence and order is a concept introduced by Karen Norgaard. It refers to ideas and activities that create ontological stability, that create distance from responsibility and assert rightness and goodness. These tools of innocence and order are specific according to social milieu, so there are different tools used in different groups. And I found four main dimensions. First, different discourses, different knowledge, different things which is known about the energy transition, but also about society in general. Then all those things related to self-representation, social demarcations, but also issues of recognition and justice. Then attributions of responsibility to oneself, to everybody, to politics. And fourth, specializations of the energy transition. So mainly the general, national, or abstract energy transition versus the close, local or regional energy transition. To give an example, here in a piece of the introduction of the group Folklore Society, so a young, rural, and traditionalist group, I read it. Actually, you notice it yourself that the climate is warming up. It wouldn't hurt if we were a bit more into regenerative energies or something. It is just difficult when politics first promises a bunch, but then nothing is really implemented. And the other point is that always the profession serves as a scapegoat that almost contributes the most to the energy transition. There's a lot of talk, but in the end, they don't have any solutions. So there's this general acceptance, it wouldn't hurt, but then only a bit more. So there's the skepticism, and then you see different points. You see the knowledge that a general transition is not feasible. There's the knowledge that we are the ones who doing the local energy transition already. It has to do with issues of recognition. So we the farmers serve as a scapegoat, but we are the ones who do the most, who are the good ones. And in the end, they kind of construct a way to energy transition. So on the one hand, the local energy transition, and on the other hand, the national energy transition, national or general one. So their position can be summed up as we as farmers are the good ones who do the most and implement the local energy transition, but a general energy transition is not realistic and only hypocrisy by green milieus and by politics. In contrast, there are other milieus, for example, a quote by a young urban and cosmopolitan group. They say, so renewables in their face say we are going to do it this way now. So they approve of the energy transition in abstract, but separated from their own life. They attribute it to the others, to them, say we are going to do it this now, throw it in their face. To give a second example, individualized sustainability. This serves as a very important tool of innocence and order, both explicitly. If everybody chips in his 2 cents, you don't need to talk about building wind power turbines or anything. So here they say if we all have to do a little bit, maybe switch off our lights, then we don't need to build wind power. But individualized sustainability also serves as a tool on innocence and order, more implicitly in the typical progression of the discussions. So typically, in these discussions, the groups discuss one energy technology after the other, and then they find that all of these technologies have their flaws, are not possible here, and then they normally would turn to the issues of individualized sustainability, which serves as an escape, as a matter of last resort to imagine the climate protection. I think that everybody can have a look to save a little bit for himself. For example, not buying strawberries in winter because everything is connected. So this discourse of individualized sustainability enables to demand climate protection to fulfill the norm of approving of the energy transition without having to imagine changes in one's close-up range or in social structures, and it simultaneously asserts one's own goodness. In these discussions, hardly present are notions of energy justice, notions of energy democracy, cooperatively owned energy structure doesn't play a role. Also, issues of good planning and democratic decision making are not mentioned. So the good life appearing in these groups is a life based on a business as usual, also with a tendency to retreat into the private and the community sphere. And again, I would say this is because a future different from today is not imaginable and or not wanted, which is a sign of a crisis of hegemony. So to conclude, social acceptance is more complex than normative acceptance reveals. One has to look at the internalized acceptance. Impossibilities of imagining a future based on renewable energies are a sign of an enduring crisis of hegemony. And different social milieux use specific tools of innocence and order, like, for example, social demarcations and individualized sustainability. And what I would take from this for a more activist point of view, one has to take serious the struggle about the common sense. One has to strengthen the social imagination of a future based on renewable energies, while at the same time, one has to be cautious to avoid these tools of innocence and order, especially individualized sustainability. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Julian, for your presentation. Everybody should be able to unmute herself or himself if you want to pose a question. Just do it or write it in the chat. Yes. In the meantime, I've got a question regarding you always said this is a sign of a crisis of hegemony, but is it really a crisis if people can't imagine something else than business as usual? I mean, why is it? Well, the new cannot be born, right? But is the old really dying? That's my question. Why are you so sure that it's not just? I mean, if also the question, what is the hegemony? Is it the relation of power, who has power or not? And so what makes you? Maybe you can define this a bit more.
I think there is a sense that the old system will not be feasible anymore. So there's a sense that something is changing, something has to change. And this change provides uneasiness, so that fear leads to anxiety, so that people don't really know what to do, and that's why they try to hold the old system, but still they know that this old system will not work anymore. So that's why there is a crisis. And it didn't talk so much about discourses, and I think there are different discourses who struggle, who compete also within the groups. So and one very important discourse is the discourse of energy mix. So we need a bridging technology, we need something until renewable energies maybe work in the future. I think this is the same discourses which are also found in German politics. And this one particular discourse is also a discourse of crisis, as it tries to prolong the state of changing. So it's not really that the old system will work anymore, but the change should be as slow as possible.
Well, follow up if it's okay.
Yes, please.
You used the concept of acceptance. I was wondering why you don't work with the category Gramsci uses. He distinguished between active and passive consent, and I think what you understand by acceptance would be what Gramsci understands under passive consensus. But still, I think regarding the involvement of the people, being it ideologically or financially in the energy transition, is also an important aspect. So, yeah, why do you use acceptance and not consent?
Well, because most of the literature deals with, I think it provides a link to the literature on acceptance and also to these discussions about NIMBY, these discussions about community acceptance, etc. So that's why I use it. Yeah.
Who else wants to pose a question? You can write in the chat or unmute yourself. Maybe it's easier if you end your presentation and people can start switching on their camera. We can, at least the ones who presented anyway. They're on the recorded video anyway. But everybody else who wants to can switch on the camera. Might give a more feeling of discussion.
Yeah, then I maybe pose another question if nobody else wants. Why do you focus on the silent majority? And quite interesting, because in general, people or researchers focus on the activists of the Energiewende movement or big business, the opponents, and so on. Why do you focus on the silent majority, and what are the key insights you generated?
Hard question regarding the key insights after the presentation.
No, by your focus, the key insights that you would have generated if you would focus on the kind of typical actors.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of work about typical actors, but to explain their success, it's not enough to look upon the resources like media or power, but you also have to look, why do they gain, why do they have influence in the broader population, and that's why I focus on the silent majority. So I think there wouldn't be so many conflicts, for example, if or conflicts about, for example, wind power siting decisions, if people wouldn't count on or at least have a feeling that they are backed up by the broader population. And I wanted to explore if that is right or not. And yeah, and I've found out that yes, it's diverse, but you have to look on the everyday acceptance, and you cannot trust the polls. Yeah. So.
Maybe we could have a more general discussion about the lack of imaginations. I think it's really crazy that we've got so different contexts of our presentation, and in each context there's a lack of imagination. Well, the Lusatia context, there was the answer was maybe it's because of fear, but in the context of what you, Julian, are researching, it's a very, well, can you say? I would say it's a rich region, or at least, yeah. I mean, they talk about not buying strawberry in winter, and that's really radical change they are fearing. And then we have the uprising in Lebanon, so a situation where people might feel empowered, but still they don't have lots of imagination. And then, Etham Chan, you talked about the difficulties in the anti-coal movement in Turkey to matching something in the context of the conflict with the government. But maybe you had the most promising imagination. I'm not sure. Maybe you can all talk about this lack of imagination a bit and why it's in these contexts, although they are so difficult, so different. I mean. You have to unmute yourself. Etham Chan, I think you were speaking, right?
I don't mind speaking if someone hasn't spoken. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. So on this it's a really good. It's something I think that we, like our Citizen Assembly, opened up more questions and answers about that. And because it's one thing to realize that there's a sense that even the alternatives that are being proposed by modernist techno-determinist narratives that was described yesterday, and we see this coming into the Lebanese context through international aid organizations, solar panels for refugee camps, as if this will solve their needs and things like that. This wasn't being captured more collectively, more widely. So it strikes me, similar to the first presentation in Turkey, that thinking of conflict and crisis as spaces and points of reconstruction, this is where people begin to reconstruct their conditions and futures, reconstituting their imaginaries. What in that moment of crisis, what needs to happen? Is there something broader around the politics, the political structures, political organization that needs to happen to shape those energies to emerge from a crisis in the same way? In the Lebanese context, this never happened in the civil war, and we carry on today feeling the ramifications of that failed reconstruction process. So how do we stop? How do we begin to utilize these conflicts? How do people emerge from conflicts in a better place? And what should it be? And should we be taking a more comparative approach when we do that? So we can, because looking at individual experiences on their own sometimes doesn't allow us to understand why post-war reconstruction in one place works and post-war reconstruction it doesn't work. And infrastructure is always centrally part of post-war reconstruction. And it can determine the trajectory, because we saw what Sophocles said about the horizons and the temporalities that the energy. I mean, one of the problems is the temporality of this, that energy transitions take place over decades and crises usually take place over a year or two. And so if you don't have that imagination over a long horizon, you don't begin to change things in the short term. And that disjuncture could be something specific to energy transitions and imaginaries or not, I don't know. This is something I'm also wondering.
Okay, maybe Etham Chan can now say what he wants to do, and then Julian. And this is an invitation to everybody. Just like Julian did, he uses the star symbol as raising a head in his hand. So if you want to make a comment or pose a question, just do it in the chat with the star symbol. You still have to unmute yourself. Is there a green dot next to your microphone symbol? There should just press on the microphone symbol. We can't hear you.
Maybe you unmuted your headphones or you muted your headset.
Maybe just try it without your headset, if that helps. Okay, then you can try to solve your technical problems. Then we Musna, no, first Julian. And
yeah, coming back to the question to the imaginability, yes, I found it very interesting that we all have this struggle for missing imagination. And I think one answer was this given by the answers to Musna and Ala by the government. So it's technical issue. It's only technical and it has nothing to do with society. So leave it to the experts. And I think this is something, of course, quite neoliberal as well. But it has a lot to do with depoliticization also in general.
I'm not sure whether Nora wants to say something or not. Probably not. But then, Musna, you can start.
Do you hear?
Yeah, that's fine. You can also make a comment now and then Musna.
Okay. I just wanted to add that, I mean, basically maybe kind of complementing what Ala said about the temporalities. I think it's not only the conflict that creates an opportunity, but sometimes we have these shocks, right? That doesn't need to be a conflict as such. And I think we should particularly consider the ongoing pandemic as a shock as such, because we have been hearing lots of things about building back better. I think the kind of futures that building back better brings in energy climate debate is quite interesting, because it also limits kind of the potential horizons to a particular kind of framing about building back better. So it's basically assuming that what was in place was functioning, so we are just improving it after this. Whereas I believe in many cases, what is needed is not really to build back better, but to rethink the whole temporalities, materialities, spatialities of energy, and how this is intertwined with different societal visions. So yeah, that was my 2 cents here. Thank you.
I just wanted to say that Nora, I want to add something, but Nora has a question. It's in the questions for speakers. So
yes, can you guys hear me? Oh, great. Thank you, Musna. Yeah, thank you. I'm struggling with actually my laptop, all the settings here. But my comment, I do find this fascinating because after I've heard all of these presentations this week, I do find really that from a perspective of a political scientist is that it does seem that we live in a democratically very challenged world. And whatever we're discussing here really has to do with these sort of atomized, siloed perspectives. I mean, there are so many discourses that we're discussing and so many commonalities, yet it almost looks like they become performed as really, parallel discourses that separate us rather than connect us, that call for sort of unified solutions. My personal case study, I don't know, you probably have not seen it, or heard it, but there are parallel discourses going on at a national level, even at a local level, and I'm wondering if this is a function of maybe too much digital information, or if there is any way to sort of cross these boundaries so that we can actually work together and not apart and produce these narratives in parallel, which basically say the same thing. I mean, I find it really frustrating. It's like we're all connected, right? We're sitting at this conference, we're different parts of the world. We come up with very similar conclusions, yet the policies that are going to be, put in place are not going to reflect any of this. So how is this possible? We're like, rather than being empowered or, using the knowledge for policy, it's doing the opposite. It's like separating us. So I mean, what I'm trying to work on is basically my theory in terms of politics and economics, political economy, is that we've lost the notion of general interest and impartiality, because everything is falling into particularity. Everything has to be, all interests have to be really defined and particular rather than general, meaning what's generally good for all of us, whether it's small community in India, indigenous community, or rural community in Lebanon, or, we all are sharing the same concerns and we're aware of it. We know it. This is different from what 30 years ago, people were not connected. Now we are connected and we cannot act. I mean, we cannot put in the right policies. We're struggling, with these, with the same issues, and it's not happening the right way. And yeah, there are temporal issues, there are long-term issues, but ultimately there must be a way. And I think the way is that we really have to think together, and we have to think what is best for us, for what is the general interest for society as a whole, for humankind on this planet, and, think differently and communicate differently. Our discourses should be meeting. They shouldn't be running in parallel.
Coming to an end.
Sorry. That's
Maybe,
it. Okay.
Musa, you still wanted to say something? Maybe you can make your comment.
If I have time, yeah. It's just two things. I feel like there is a difference in the discussion and imaginaries between the different localities and where the lack of imagination emerges from. Because I feel that what I hear in some of the sites is that there is satisfaction with the status quo. So it's like, whereas what I hear in Lebanon,
Yes.
maybe to some extent in Turkey, is that there is lack of imagination because of the status quo. And as an anthropologist, I would like to think of more than what people say and observe what actually people do. This kind of stress on the discourse.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what happens actually in people's practices. Is there another imagination that emerges from people's practices? And then you could see where the blocks are and the kind of material conditions. So in the citizen assembly, we had people speak of wanting to change their bulbs into LED to reduce energy consumption. So they have that practice, but then that gets it's broken right away because the electricity current is not stable. And so they have these kinds of struggles in the everyday that shows there is another imagination that they try to practice, that they desire, but then dystopia is a result of the failure in practicing something different. So I'm just wondering also with the silent majorities, there is that Julian speaks about, is that just discourse, but what have you observed from how they do things, of actually how do they daily live their lives, and does it change?
Yes, great point, yeah.
Okay.
There was another question in the audience, right?
Was there? Yeah. How did you notice?
Someone said, I did F and can.
But actually, we are running out of time. We are supposed to end 3 minutes ago, because there's the wrap up of the conference, which you can take part. But I'm very glad that we had this discussion in the end about imaginations, and hopefully we can continue the discussion in future events. So enjoy your day and see you. Bye.
Thank you, Timo. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Great presentation. Thank you.